Okay, so if I start my spiritual journey, I would start, I guess, sixth grade in Italy. Prior to that, I was in a bunch of Catholic schools in Venezuela, so that was the main thing. We were all Catholic. But in my family, my grandmother was very oriented towards Eastern beliefs, and so was my mom. The problem was my her father had taken that to an extreme to the point where he prayed that he would burn all his karma in this life, and he ended up leaving his family because he suffered from spiritual psychosis or something. I think that's what they call it. So he had to be interned for the rest of his life. So that was a pretty high price to pay. So there was the belief, but then there was the fear because it affected all their lives. So he kind of abandoned his obligation in a selfish way. I always saw that as a very selfish thing he did. But I did meet him, and he had these beautiful blue eyes, and it was all peace. Once I met him once. He looked a lot like my mom and her brothers. Um,
What was his
so
name?
Salvador. He was a lawyer, I think, but he abandoned everything for that, for his spiritual quest, which you shouldn't do when you have 5 kids and a wife. It's very selfish. He had already chosen that life, so he should have waited. But he took it to an extreme. So I knew that. So I knew there had to be balance in your search, and and my family's tendency was not to do things in a balanced way. So when we went to Italy, I was in a Catholic school. It was a big, important Catholic school in Milan. I remember I read the Bible in Italian. I learned Italian, and I was always very, you know, close to God. And especially growing up alone so much, he was like my best friend. And I remember I did my first communion that year, and the head of the school invited the Cardinal of Milan to preside over the First Communion, and it turned out a year later that he was elected Pope Paul VI. So I still have a little frame with a picture of Jesus, and it says, remembrance of your First Communion and the date and everything. So I thought that was special. Basically, my attitude was, okay, so now he's Pope, I guess I'm forgiven all my sins for the rest of my life. Sort of like the guy in the Life of Pi that kept going from one religion to another. But after that, you could say, when I went back to, I went to the military school, so there was nothing really special there. The only thing is I was alone, and I always felt like God was right there with me, protecting me, like a friend. And let's see, when I went back to Venezuela in my junior year of high school, there was another Catholic school, but this one was actually a very negative experience. They kept criticizing the fact that my parents were divorced. It was ironic actually because the priest that criticized that, many years later, he got sent to this little church in the western part of Venezuela, and he was starving. And my father and his wife, Nancy, were the ones that every weekend would bring him food. The same people that he had criticized and said condemned to hell. So I kind of lost all interest in that organized religion. And then at 15, I went to New York, and I was alone. And so anytime I felt alone, just like in the military school, I always talked to God. I always felt he was right there with me, like a presence. I always felt him right there behind me on my right shoulder. I couldn't distinguish him clearly, but I could feel him like he was walking next to me. And I would always turn to the right to talk to him. And I started getting interested in more of the Hindu things. I always believed in reincarnation. It explained why there was such inequalities in the world. So I was always very firm on that, and that goes against all the organized religions. And then I think when I was 18, I was already 19, I was starting grad school in math. And my mom talked to me, she was a Rosicrucian. So I said, let me try that. And I tried it for about a year. But then I told her it wasn't for me. That, they taught me how to meditate and stuff like that, but I just didn't feel a connection. So
What do they believe? What is that?
I don't even remember. I think has a Catholic foundation. There's some monks, so they must have some kind of Catholic thing. But I don't even remember. They used to send me stuff every month and exercises on meditating and stuff like that. But I don't remember it all. I remember reading The Third Eye by a Tibetan monk. Actually, I gave Beatrice the book when I met her when we started going out. But then I went back to Venezuela, and in Venezuela there was really, it's so Catholic and everything, and I was totally passive with respect to all that it was just nothing until I remember my mom, after my brother's death, she went through a really bad period, but then we all met the head of the Krishna movement, Prabhupada, and he was in Venezuela visiting, and one day they just said, oh, look, there's this person from India who's starting a movement in the West, and he's here in Caracas. So we went to this meeting, my mom, me, Beatriz. I was just married, so it was just our first year of marriage, and Lolita, my sister. And I remember he was there, he talked to us, I sat almost next to him, and he was talking about Krishna and the movement. And I remember that it touched me, but it really influenced my mom and my sister. They got really involved. My mom, that's been her belief until now. She's 90 now. That was probably around 1976. So almost 50 years ago. And he was a really big personality. He's in all the Krishna books. And Lolita went all the way to join. She joined the movement, moved to LA. She would help translate some of the basic books that teach the foundation, the more important ones, into Spanish, from English to Spanish. And her life was there for several years until she left the movement and went back to living a regular secular life in Florida. My mom couldn't go as far because her husband didn't let her. Her husband was very controlling. He was to the point that he wanted to even control her thoughts, which was stupid, a moron. But so she had to do all her stuff in hiding. So when she moved to Florida, she kept going to the temple and she followed all her beliefs, and until this day, I'm sure she did. And she passed that on to me. I remember I read the basic book, the Bhagavad Gita, around that time, and I used to chant to my horses because it used to say that if you chanted to them, they would come back in human form in the next life. So I did that for all my horses. And so it was like that. Then we left Venezuela, and you're on your own, and you just wait to see what God sends you. When we went to Hawaii, I remember talking to this lady who my mom recommended, who told me, listen, you've asked for a break from all the things you've been doing, but there's a lot of people there waiting for you to give you information and stuff. And so I just kind of followed the path. I started reading some, philosophy books and some metaphysical books. And until I came across, there was this author, Joshua Stone, who summarized all the different paths that people could take, and I saw that there was one that talked about Yogananda, and so I read his book, and I was influenced by it, so I joined his self-realization group and got initiated into his yoga, which is Kriya Yoga. And I did it for 20 years daily. But somehow, I don't know what happened. I guess around the time of the pandemic, I started, I did the Kriya every day faithfully. And then one day I felt like I needed more, and I went back to chanting the Hare Krishna.
But before then, did you have any transformative experiences? Like, what about when you were driving?
I did have one. I had one. But when I got initiated, I had one. I could see him clearly just there in his presence, Yogananda. But the big one was one day in Magaha. I was meditating by this cave that's there, and I had this feeling that I had lived there before, many centuries before. I think when the land of Mu was there and it was destroyed, and I died there. I felt it, and I felt a baby cry, which I think it was Isabel, and then in my meditation, I remember I had Buddha and Jesus sitting down in this meadow, and then Krishna came and he started playing his flute. And that was like the first call I got that told me that my relationship was with him. And so from that point on, I mean, I would chant quietly. I didn't really pursue anything. I just knew that that's who my best friend had been all my life. But I didn't pursue it. I just chanted and kept my relationship. Probably the other big time then, I remember, because all these philosophy books are always saying, yeah, when you achieve self-realization and this and that, it made it seem so easy and so hard at the same time. And I remember one time going to work, I started meditating and said, let me go inward and inward and inward. And I went so far inward that I got to a point where I felt like there was this curtain there and there was this presence right behind, and that was me. And it was great because I said, oh, that's who I really am. And I got the confirmation that not only was that who I was really am, but that's who I had been and will always be. So all fear of death or any of that stuff just went away the moment you realize who you are, truly are. And from that point on, I could always go back inward and touch that essence and ask questions, what to do or not to do or this or that.
So like higher self, or
yeah, it was
your soul.
It was my soul.
It was just more a feeling, or you could see.
It was the puppet master.
What it looked like, or it was just more of a.
It was more like just a presence.
Light?
Yeah, a light. But it was you could tell it was the puppet master, the one who ran the show. You could tell, and it was eternal and had always been, and that was it. So from then on, I would always could go inward and do that. I tried doing regressions. I came across a whole bunch of lives, but the more important one was I went back and I saw myself as a tiger in Vrindavan, which was Krishna's birthplace here on earth, and he was there. And I happened to be there as a tiger because there were not enough human bodies to be born there at the time. And I could see from inside the head, looking through the eyes, I could see him there in the garden. So that was amazing. And that was again another confirmation that was my connection. And so.
What about the Heidelberg one?
Yeah, that was when we did the regression there. But that one was more to explain this life, because when I saw myself as a mathematician in Heidelberg, I was a Swiss going to working there, going working on some problems in Heidelberg, and then I died going home on the train. I saw that, and then it explained why in this life I ended up at NYU studying math with so many teachers that had been to Heidelberg. So it's like unfinished business, and I got to continue. And so in that sense, the physical part of my life was allowed to continue what, of course, not exactly, but follow that same path or similar path, and had come in contact with some of the friends I had had in that life. It explains so much in that sense. And I'm still ongoing because I still feel it, and I still feel like there's something I haven't finished, and I keep touching different themes and thinking that I'm getting closer to it. Eric also said there was something unfinished. So I've been, this job I have now has kind of thrust me in those directions. So I'm thinking that it's something's going to come up from that.